Before Autobots, before Decepticons, Primus built 13 beings that created life, controlled time, and ultimately destroyed each other. One of them arranged it all from the shadows, and the one who built his weapon never saw it coming. Primus built 13 beings and placed them at the origin of everything, each one given a purpose, each one carrying an artifact that defined their entire existence. Some of those purposes were noble. One of them started the collapse of everything the others had spent their existence building. This is who they actually were and what they actually did. Prima was first in the story and in real life. He appeared in a 1989 Marvel comic called Primal Scream, decades before the 13 existed as a formal concept, decades before anyone had assembled a roster around him. The legend came before the list. That actually fits. He was the ideal, built most completely in Primus's own image, handed the Star Saber, placed at the head of a group before leadership had ever been tested in any meaningful way. His sword could split matter at the atomic level or flatten a mountain depending on what the moment required. Selfless, certain, the kind of leader who never second-guessed the right call. Extraordinary under pressure, occasionally impossible to argue with. Prima was first. Primus built the second Prime to be his mirror. Same raw capability, same structural advantages, every resource you'd want in a leader, and a completely different soul. If you want to keep up with this kind of deep lore breakdown, subscribing takes 2 seconds, and it means you won't miss what's coming next. Megatronus the Fallen. Megatronus was not born a villain. The difference between him and Prima wasn't power, and it was a belief he carried that none of the others shared, that he was made too close to Unicron's nature to ever be capable of genuine good. That belief didn't push him to fight harder against it. It gave him permission to stop trying. His weapon was the Requiem Blaster, a plasma cannon powered by the core of an actual star. He requested it from the maker of the group. He knew exactly what he intended to use it for when he made that request. When the war ended, he abandoned the name entirely. Megatronus was gone. Only the Fallen remained. He killed the one who built his weapon, betrayed every Prime who had stood beside him, and exiled himself through a dimensional bridge into deep space. One thing worth holding on to, in Transformers 1, Megatronus appears as a martyr and a hero, not a villain at all. That's not a retcon. It's the clearest signal the franchise has ever given that he's not a fixed character. Megatronus is not a biography. He is a role, and different universes cast that role differently. The name stays constant, the meaning doesn't. Megatronus fell because of one weapon, and the Prime who built that weapon paid the biggest price of all. Solus Prime, the maker. Every Prime came to Solus when they needed something built, not because she was the strongest fighter, yet because she was the only one who could take an idea that existed purely as intent and translate it into physical form with total precision. The Forge was her artifact and her identity simultaneously, but the Covenant of Primus is specific about something. The Forge alone was limited. It only became truly world-shaping when used alongside a creation lathe, and when Solus brought her own skill, her own intention, and her own focus into every single strike. The Star Saber, the Apex armor, the enigma of combination. She built all of it. She is also the first female Transformer, with every female Cybertronian afterward designed from her original template. Her story is the turning point of the age. Megatronus asked her to build him the Requiem Blaster, the weapon from the beginning of this video. She had reservations. Those reservations were pushed aside by forces working against her, and she built it. One object created against her better judgment started the collapse of everything the 13 had spent their existence constructing. She didn't cause the war. She was the tool someone else used to start it. There is a difference, and the Covenant never lets you forget that. Someone worked against her before she ever made that choice, and he was very patient about it. Liege, Maximo, the manipulator, Liege Maximo, was not the strongest of the 13. He was the most dangerous. His physical artifact was the Liege darts, toxin-filled projectiles designed for combat. The Covenant is completely direct about this. The darts were never his real weapons. His weapon was language. He could find the weak spot in any person, any relationship, any belief, and he was patient enough to wait a very long time for exactly the right moment to use it. He quietly maneuvered Megatronus and Solus toward the choices that broke everything apart, never destroying the 13 himself, but positioning others to do it for him. One small archival note. His name is correctly spelled Liege, but the original Marvel Comics printing had a typo and it came out as Liege, making him one of the only Transformers characters whose misspelling became part of the official record. Even the documentation couldn't get him right. His severed arm later shows up as a relic wielded by Megatron, detached from the rest of him, still causing problems. Some characters outlast themselves in the most unnerving ways. Liege Maximo worked through the record by staying out of it. The next Prime is the one who wrote it. Alpha Trion, the historian. Everything you know about the other 12 primes, every fact, every detail, every story in this video came through Alpha Trion. He is the narrator of the Covenant of Primus, the complete record of the 13's existence. He decides what gets written. He decides how it gets framed. Every piece of information about the most powerful beings ever created exists in the form Alpha Trion chose to give it. His artifacts were the Covenant itself and the quill used to write it. And that quill held a power he kept from the other primes. It could rewrite the future, though the ability was unpredictable enough that even he couldn't use it freely. He also carried total recall and a direct connection to Primus's spark, not as a weapon, but as an anchor, because holding the full weight of all history without something grounding, you would break any mind. One continuity note worth flagging, making Alpha Trion one of the original 13 was a later creative decision made during the Aligned era. Earlier lore had implied the original 13 all died long before Alpha Trion's story even began, meaning the franchise rewrote its own history through the one character whose entire job was writing history. He wasn't built to fight, he was built to remember. The question worth sitting with about everything said before this point is what he chose to leave out. Alpha Trion recorded everything. The next Prime controlled something bigger than memory. He controlled time itself. Vector Prime, the timekeeper. Vector Prime did not fight with a weapon. He fought with reality itself. Create paradoxes or prevent them. Bend time in either direction. Compress entire stretches of space. Repair dimensional tears that no other being could even perceive. His artifact was the Blades of Time. Despite the name, not a traditional weapon, but something closer to a puzzle. Multiple interlocking pieces that could arrange into near infinite configurations, each one opening access to a different point in time or space. Here's the production detail that reframes everything. Vector Prime was created for the Transformers Cybertron cartoon in 2005 and was only pulled backward into the mythology of the 13 much later. A character invented for a kids' show, absorbed into the creation myth of an entire universe. The franchise built ancient legend retroactively around a fan favorite, and it worked completely. That says everything about how strong the character was to begin with. Vector Prime moved through time alone. The next Prime's entire power was making sure no one else had to. Micronus Prime, the amplifier. Micronus Prime was the smallest of the 13 by a significant margin. That is the least important thing about him. He carried more concentrated energy than any of the other 12, and his ability was amplification. Link himself to another Prime, and that Prime's output reached somewhere it couldn't get to on its own. He could borrow pieces of their abilities while connected, and his artifact, the Primus Stone, made those links possible. The image the lore keeps returning to is Micronus sitting on Solus Prime's shoulder during forging sessions, quietly feeding extra power into every hammer strike, making her creation stronger than even she could manage alone. He's the first minicon in Transformers history, and every compact, underestimated fighter across the franchise traces a direct line back to him, the smallest one in the room, making the room work. Micronus amplified others. The next Prime's power was something no one could share, a weight he carried alone in a way none of the others could ever fully understand. Onyx Prime, the beast. Onyx Prime was the most feral of the 13. More animal than machine, he could project his consciousness across time and space, sending his awareness far beyond his physical body to perceive things none of the others could reach. His artifact was the Triptych mask, and it operated across 3 separate modes. Farsight gave visions across distance and time. Predator gave perfect understanding of any living creature's nature and intent. Then there was Morn Song, a death-linked vision so specific to Onyx that no other being could fully comprehend what it revealed. Not a power he could explain or share, a burden that belonged entirely to him. He's also the first beast transformer in existence, the original template for every Predacon, every Maximal, every beast mode bot the franchise ever built. His ending in the lore is one of the quietest moments in the entire mythology. At the close of the Age of Primes, Onyx is carried down into the well of all sparks, and Micronus, the smallest of the 13, is hidden on his back, refusing to leave his closest companion. After everything the 13 built and broke and lost, that's how it ends for both of them. Two primes, one final moment, neither one willing to face it alone. Onyx understood the nature of living creatures better than any of the others. The next prime treated the variety of those creatures as something worth celebrating. Amalgamous Prime, the shapeshifter, Amalgamous Prime never held a single form. His body was in constant motion, reshaping, shifting between sizes and materials without effort or limit, cycling through configurations the way other beings cycle through moods. He was a trickster before he was a warrior, someone who looked at the variety of physical existence and treated it as something worth celebrating rather than controlling. His artifacts were the shape-shifting scythe, which matched his nature by never holding one form either, and the original transformation cog. That second artifact is why everything else matters. The T-cog he carried is the literal prototype for the device inside every transformer ever built. Every time any transformer converts from robot mode to vehicle mode across any continuity, any film, any show, any comic, any game ever made, they're running technology that traces directly back to Amalgamous Prime. Every transformation, all of it starts here. The franchise has written almost nothing about him. He's in every story anyway. Amalgamous gave every transformer the ability to change. The next Prime's plan was to fill the entire universe with life, and it worked perfectly. That's the problem. Quintus Prime, the experimenter. Quintus Prime's entire purpose was the creation of new life, not just on Cybertron, but across the cosmos. His artifact was the Emberstone, built to spark living organisms into existence and send them into worlds that had never known life before. The reasoning was clean. A universe full of life meant Cybertron would never face the unknown completely alone. So he built the Emberstone, seeded life across the cosmos, and then walked away from some of those experiments before they were finished. The Quintessons, the robot slavers who appear throughout Transformers history, insisting they invented all Transformer life, are the direct descendants of experiments Quintus abandoned. He left, they didn't disappear, they organized, evolved, and became one of the most dangerous forces in the known universe. Quintus Prime got exactly what he designed the Emberstone to produce, just a version of it he never anticipated, and not one he could have controlled even if he'd stayed. Quintus created life and walked away from it. The next Prime was a first of a different kind, not a creator, but a combiner, and his last act was to break himself apart. Nexus Prime, the first combiner. Nexus Prime holds one specific title: the first combiner in existence. Not in the sense that he merged with others, that his own body could separate into multiple fully independent components, each with its own mind and personality, then reconstitute into a single, far more powerful form without losing anything. No confusion, no blending. Just individual minds choosing to operate as one. His artifact was the enigma of combination, which could reshape itself into almost any physical form because its power was never contained in its shape. When the Age of Primes ended, Nexus made a decision that defined the rest of his existence. He split himself apart and scattered his components across the universe to hide the enigma. Not destroyed, not locked away, scattered, so that finding it would require finding all of him first. One real-world note: his original name was Nexus Maximus, changed due to a trademark conflict. One of the clearest examples in franchise history of corporate paperwork directly rewriting official mythology. A Prime renamed because of a filing. There's something fitting about that, given what he chose to do with his own identity in the lore. He dismantles himself as a security measure and then just stays that way. Nexus saw the universe in terms of what things could become when combined. The next Prime saw something underneath the structure entirely, forces and cycles invisible to everyone else. Alchemist Prime, the mystic. Alchemist Prime did not see what the other 12 saw. Where they looked at the world and perceived mechanics and structure, he saw spiritual cycles and elemental forces running underneath everything. Less soldier than navigator, capable of transmuting metals and temporarily altering the physical properties of matter around him. His artifact was the lenses. And here is what makes them different from every other artifact on this list. They were built directly into his own eyes, not a weapon anyone else could pick up, carry, or use. Part of him, only ever him. They let him perceive the energy signature of any object or living being, the hidden properties of things, what held them together at a molecular and metaphysical level simultaneously. His function in the group was to read what they were walking into before anyone drew a weapon. One continuity adds a detail that reframes everything. In Cyberverse, Alchemist Prime is Macadam, the ancient bartender who has run a famous Cybertronian establishment across millions of years of history, watching the entire story of the franchise unfold from behind a counter, the most mystical of the original 13, hiding in the most ordinary place imaginable, seeing everything. The disguise makes perfect sense when you understand what the lenses could do. These 12 primes were carved into history. The 13th chose to be erased from it. The 13th Prime, the mystery. The identity has never been confirmed in official lore. What the Covenant establishes is that the 13th carried Onyx down into the well of all sparks at the close of the Age of Primes, a specific, significant act attached to almost no name. Alpha Trion replaced that name with the symbol for 13, so this Prime could not be searched for, tracked, or found. He then stepped down from being a Prime entirely and went to live as an ordinary Cybertronian, not above his people, just one of them. The Covenant describes him as an extraordinary warrior with what it calls the fortitude of kings. No ego attached to any of it. He was calm, dutiful, and ultimately the mediator and visionary the group needed most. His final words were 3. All are one. He said them at the close of the Age of Primes and walked down into the well. The Covenant states that the Matrix holds the collected knowledge of all 13, including what it calls Optimus Prime's own long-forgotten legacy. That single line is the closest the aligned continuity ever gets to saying out loud that Optimus and the 13th are the same soul. Other versions of the franchise hand the role to different figures. Sentinel Prime, Nova Prime, Zeta Prime. The identity was never locked, so the biggest identity secret in Transformers history was created by the character himself, written out of existence completely by his own request. The 13th Prime is the open seat, a role the mythology kept deliberately unfilled, because according to the Covenant, the lineage was never actually closed. It was always waiting for someone to step into it. Whether that someone already has is the question the lore refuses to answer. Which Prime do you think has the best story? Drop it in the comments.